I've got nothing personally against wind or solar, although I think that the windmills are hideous and they devastate the landscapes that they're placed in. And that actually matters because, well, one of the our environmentalist contentions is that the beauty of nature is a value in and of itself, as well as something that's of obvious benefit to human beings. And windmill littered landscapes are by no means beautiful. And I actually think that that's a problem because ugly matters. But there's issues that are much more relevant than that. It's like solar panels don't last very long. They're very susceptible to hailstorms, for example. They're very energy demanding in their production. They're often manufactured in China and often using slave labor, which doesn't strike me as a particularly positive benefit. They tend to work very badly at night. And wind power, of course, both wind and solar costs spiral up towards the infinite as the supply decreases, right? So there's no solar at night. And my understanding of what that means is that even if we had a wind and solar grid, which we don't, that was reliable and that plentiful, which we certainly don't and are nowhere near doing, we need a backup system anyways. And this is what's happened in Germany. And
exactly.
They took their bloody nuclear plants offline, and then they defaulted to coal, and then they burn lignite, which is the most polluting form of coal. And now in Germany, they have much less electricity. It's much more unstable. They're much more dependent on foreign tyrants for their energy, and they pollute more while they're deindustrializing.
Exactly. And they've also driven up the cost of the energy.
Yeah, 5 times what it should be.
The quality of life for the people in Germany is in decline. And it's a straight correlation. High energy costs, lower quality of life.
Yeah.
And so I look, wind and solar has their place, but they're additives to our energy mix. They are not baseload. They can't be baseload. Not to mention, as I said, where you get the value in energy, where you can drive down the cost is the higher density energy.
Describe that for people, because people don't understand what that means.
Well, you think about, wood, for example, right? It's not very dense, has lots of energy in it, but it's not very dense. So the huge advancement was going to coal because it was a far smaller amount of product to produce the same amount of energy. And then you get to oil and natural gas, which is similar. Once again, you're using less product to get the same amount of energy. And the real genie, or the best we have so far, is when you look at nuclear, when you look at uranium. The amount of energy you can generate out of your uranium is phenomenally better from an amount of material you need as opposed to the other products. And in British Columbia, it's interesting. You think the left doesn't support, nuclear power.
That's so
which
insane.
is crazy.
So insane.
But in British Columbia, it was actually a center-right party that actually banned nuclear power from being used in BC, which is weird. But it was because of politics. It's too many politicians today. They chase, where they think the vote is, as opposed to standing on the principles, standing on the values that are needed to be able to create a good society and quality of life. And so that to me is where politics needs to go. And often that's not necessarily politics of the right or the left. It's just, politics that is willing to actually stand up and say, no, these are the values that we stand for. This is what we're going to go and say that we need to do for our society. And then ask people to support that, make the case, as opposed to trying to, pander to the various political positionings.
So back to the nuclear issue. So it is the case that the radicals on the left oppose nuclear, although, as you pointed out, the conservative types and the more classic liberals can also get entirely confused about this in a kind of stupid populist manner. But let's lay a few things out here. So, well, as you pointed out, nuclear energy is very energy dense, and that means you get more energy per unit of matter. Okay, why is that relevant? Well, it decreases transportation costs, for example, and that also reduces environmental load. And so it's much more effective to ship coal than wood, and it's much more efficient to ship natural gas than coal, right? So, and that also has its environmental benefit. Okay, and then you might say on the downside, on the nuclear side, people are afraid of nuclear radiation and they're afraid of what to do with the nuclear waste. But nuclear power has historically been very safe. More people die from solar power every year than from nuclear power. And the fundamental reason for that is because they fall off roofs when they're installing the panels. I mean, life's complicated, right? It's not something that you'd predict. But
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But I look at it this way. So as a province in British Columbia, they've got this green agenda. And what they want to do is they want to go to using heat pumps instead of using natural gas. And so you look at it and think, oh, okay, well, that sounds good. Why wouldn't you do that? Heat pumps, well, other than the fact that they're very ineffective when it's cold.
Which is a real problem in Canada.
Which is the vast majority of British Columbia, right in the winter. However, when you look at it and say, if every house in British Columbia required a heat pump and every business in British Columbia required a heat pump, we would need to build the equivalent of 6 or 7 more Site C dams.
Right.
And we're not going to likely build another major dam in BC. So where's that power going to come from? We're already net importers of electricity into British Columbia. I mean, we've got these vast amounts of hydroelectric power. Our grid is almost all green if you consider hydro power green. But we don't have enough. And they want to put these restrictions on saying we need to use more of it, but there's no plan to build it out. And this is where we actually have to start having that conversation about nuclear. Whether it's small modular reactors or other types of nuclear technology, we're going to need that power in British Columbia. Yeah. And so it's something that I think as a government, we need to go out and have an honest conversation with people about. Like, let's talk about what it means and what the cost is for people and what that means for your quality of life and what the options are. And let's just be straight up with people and let them decide where they would like to go.
So we'll delve in one more way into the nuclear issue. So the fundamental shibboleth of the left with regards to the environment is carbon dioxide production. Now, personally, and I'm not going to push you on this to any degree, but personally, I'm very skeptical of the climate change, science. Science is a complicated business, and what the media reports is not necessarily science. I've been struck to the core, I would say, by the NASA reported findings that the planet has greened 20% since the year 2000, and that one consequence of that is that crops are much more productive, like 13 to 15% more productive. And that is directly because of carbon dioxide increase. And so I truly believe that a dispassionate scientist who wasn't being affected by the hangover of the anti-human Malthusian agenda from the 1960s would look at the data and say, well, the planet's 20% greener, and most of that greening occurred in semi-arid areas, so the deserts are actually shrinking. How the hell is that not a net good from the environmental side? Independent of that, if you do believe that carbon dioxide is the villain, and you believe that independently of your anti-human, Malthusian, anti-industrialization, drive, there's too many people on the planet, well, then you do everything you could to reduce carbon dioxide. Okay, and if you're not going to impoverish and starve people, then you're going to use nuclear. But the left opposes nuclear. So what can you do but conclude that there's something other than even an anti-carbon dioxide agenda that's driving that system of ideas? It has to be something like an anti-capitalist, anti-industrialization, anti-human population agenda, because nothing else accounts for the left's opposition to nuclear power.
I always like to joke, and I mean, it's a sad reality, but how is it that we've convinced carbon-based beings that carbon is a problem?
Yeah, well, the carbon-based beings are the problem.
Well, certainly the thinking. I don't necessarily mean the carbon-based beings are a problem, but...
No, I meant that in terms of how the left is conceptualizing this.
But I look at it from a perspective in British Columbia, like this is why we want to get rid of the carbon tax. I mean, taxing people into poverty in some vain attempt to change the weather is absolute lunacy. It makes no sense whatsoever. So that sort of stuff has got to go. Not to mention, it drives up your energy costs, which means you're lowering your quality of life. And you're costing people, their ability to be able to put food on the table and pay their rent. It doesn't make any sense to be doing this. And so that's not an approach that we're going to be worried about in British Columbia should the Conservatives have a chance to win a government. And it's just because we can't make a difference. Even if you think CO2 is the problem, and many people still believe that, we can't make a difference one way or the other anyway. Even if we stop everything we did, we're a fraction of a percentage point. We're a rounding error.
Everything the West does with regards to the green agenda on atmospheric grounds is rendered 100% irrelevant by China and India. And the leftists say, well, we can be an example. It's like, I don't think we're posing much of an example to the Chinese. How many coal plants have they built in the last 2 years? It's like 600. It's some ridiculous number.
But to me, I also look at it and think, okay, we're a small trading jurisdiction, British Columbia is, and Canada to a degree is as well. We depend very much on exporting our goods. So if we're driving up the cost of our goods, there's simple supply and demand. If you want to buy an apple and I've got an apple for sale for $3 and somebody else has an apple for sale for $2, you're going to go get the apple for $2, right? I mean, you're going to stretch your dollars as much as you can. And so if we're driving up the cost of our goods through carbon taxes and other policies in British Columbia, we can't compete on a global scale.